So almost half a year after being officially unveiled, how has the Google Pixel 7 fared in the time since? Well, here's how the biggest and potentially the best made by Google smartphone is holding up. This is our long-term review of the Pixel 7 Pro. When we start to look at the design and the hardware, I will say that I've had compliments and questions from friends and relatives that regularly don't even care about tech or smartphones in general when I'm using this phone. The refresh design also makes the Pixel 7 Pro stand out in the crowd, and that's something that has been a real benefit. This is something I do really like, but I would love a few more high quality accessories to be made available. There doesn't seem to be a complete and utter wealth of those. We're slowly getting there, but the Pixel series is still fairly niche in an area that even has a high proportion of users here in the UK. I think there's a fusion of several influences in terms of the design, and while I do agree that, like the Pixel 6 Pro, the Pixel 7 Pro feels very Samsung in its execution, the changes to the camera bar are welcome and this has held up well over time. Sadly though, while the metal band is a good design choice, it's likely to deflect damage a little bit more easily than the previous camera system. It can be easy to scratch and scuff. Because it does, of course, protrude outwards, I find that without a case, which I do sometimes use this phone without a case, I catch it on pockets and zippers. I have found that a good adhesive protective layer does help reduce this alongside a good case as well. I have been switching between the official Hazel Pixel case and a Moment case, and I find that that latter provides better overall edge protection, which is going to help increase longevity of my Pixel 7 Pro. One of the main points here though is that the build quality is definitely a further step forward over its predecessor. Even after some serious usage of around 6 months, travelling and doing whatnot, I can't say I've had any major problems. We all know that Google's quality control has been a major point of contention since the birth of the Pixel lineup. Rough edges are proving to be less of a problem this time around, and I do think the fit and finish are getting closer to the likes of the Galaxy S series and the iPhone, if a few steps behind. Sure, it's not quite there, but baby steps in the right direction is still progress after all. I do think that the very edges of the device can feel a little bit thin at times, and my colleagues Ben Shun and Abner Lee also very much agree with that sentiment. A good case obviously reduces this, but that's certainly very much a nitpick on my own part. Ordinarily though, I tend to stick to the smaller Pixel devices, and this is actually the first year where I've regularly switched between the Pixel 7 and the larger Pixel 7 Pro every 4 to 5 weeks. There are a number of reasons for this. Most notably, I love that I can tune down the screen of the Pro model back to 1080p to help eke out a few more hours of daily usage. Plus, I do think the slightly softer curves make this screen easier to use, and that was one of my major complaints with the Pixel 6 Pro. I'm actually pretty indifferent to curved screens overall, so I think this is a good decision by Google, and they made that right choice in flattening things out, as it just means better overall usability. But I would love to see a flat screen across the board with all of the Pixel flagships coming later this year. I will say that the display itself is truly exceptional. It isn't quite the best on Android, bit far from it, but it's well calibrated, and that improved 1500 nit maximum or peak brightness is also a lovely touch. The 120Hz refresh rate makes all on-device content smooth and cohesive, especially with apps that you would regularly scroll through. I do find it a bit annoying that some apps are still capped at 60Hz, including Google Maps and several video calling services like Meet and previously Duo. I still think that as well you should probably use that force peak refresh rate toggle in developer options, as the adaptive frame rate can make things feel slower or less fluid here and there. But overall, no complaints with the display. I really do like it. It's great for consuming content, especially HDR content on services like Netflix. One minor change though that makes a big difference to me in terms of the chassis here is the slight shift of the power button and volume buttons downward just by a few millimeters. It feels really right, and the hand gymnastics are no longer needed, and I say that as someone who has quite large hands. A complaint that still holds up though regarding the screen itself is I think it has a hollow tap when you actually press quite hard. This has zero effect on how the screen itself runs or looks, but it is noticeable if you heavily bump the panel or tap the panel and expect a solid glass feel. On top of that, haptic buzzes help alleviate this when you're interacting with the Pixel 7 Pro. At one time I would say the haptic feedback would be the best on Android, and while it is excellent here, Oppo, OnePlus the market leaders, at least for me, in that regard. Since its launch, Google has also pushed several updates to the Pixel 7 Pro, and many of these patches and updates and OTAs have squashed many bugs and nitpicks you might have had with Android 13 running on older devices. The annoying update delays though that seem to plague Tensor powered phones still linger, but waiting a week for device improving updates I think seemed like a fair compromise from my perspective. You might feel otherwise, but even with these annoying delays, Pixel owners still remain at the front of the queue for the latest Android builds, including the upcoming Android 14 release, and that's definitely something to consider here, even if some updates are delayed by a week or two. Android 13 itself, the stable release, has steadily been tuned and tweaked since its release back in August 2022. I think if you like Google's lean builds with a heavy emphasis on Material U, then the Pixel 7 Pro is simply the best way to enjoy Android. Sure, the Tensor G2 processor is not the best of the best, although it's not at the top of the charts, it's still razor sharp and it blazes through the basics and then some, including some 3D games. In somewhat a contradiction though, I must admit that even with the supposed 60% performance gains over its predecessor, I can't honestly say that I've noticed a major difference between the Pixel 6 Pro and the Pixel 7 Pro, even when using these side by side. It has been more than good enough for my needs, and I'm sure that will be the same for 99.9% of Android fans out there too. Of course, Tensor itself is sold on machine learning based processing and tasks. This includes natural and that real-time language and image processing and features like photo unblur. At launch, this seemed impressive, but we've seen the raw power of the most recent Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 and how it can just surpass these touted benefits with raw under the hood grunt. Does this mean that the 5nm based chip is bad? Well, I'd argue no. Some would certainly say otherwise, and that is a fair complaint, and it's something that may become more problematic as time progresses. What is a problem though is the heat management of Google's latest chipset. It can get hotter than the competition, which is annoying as this can cause thermal throttling, or worse, it prevents the ability to record 4K 60 FPS videos for longer than 10 minutes or longer than 10-minute periods. This is a marked improvement over the first generation Tensor processor, but nowhere near enough in our eyes if you're getting thermal throttling and experiencing poor performance and slowdowns as a result. The volume of complaints that we saw regarding the Pixel 6 series in-display fingerprint scanner was actually quite staggering to us. Google has seemingly addressed this with the Pixel 6a, Pixel 7 and the Pixel 7 Pro by using a completely different in-display reader. Thankfully it means that unlocks are now more reliable, but it would be nice to get a bit of a speed boost in future models. By no means would we call the new scanner slow, it's just a few steps behind similar readers from OnePlus, Xiaomi, Oppo and even Samsung, and that's even with multiple performance related updates on top of the shipping with the most recent software. I do though like and implore you to try out Face Unlock for yourself because it is fast and fluid. I will say personally I do prefer the in-display reader now that certain issues have been resolved though. It's just another option to have in the software and shows that Google is listening to criticisms and ensuring that everyone is catered for. And the Face Unlock itself isn't exactly slow, it's quite a nice little option on top of that in-display scanner. When we start to look at the camera after last year's upgrades, it certainly feels like Google has settled in and is getting the most from the ISOCELL GN1 sensor now. Throw in that upgraded 5x periscope zoom and the improved 2x digital crop using the main sensor, and pictures do take a minor but notable step up over the Pixel 6 series. I think personally the enhanced zoom means that you'll just get better pictures at all ends of the focal range. I'm using photos at 10x and above a lot more regularly now, and the over-sharpening issues that we saw last year have been reduced quite substantially. What is interesting though is just how much of the processing seems to take place after the shutter has been pressed. I found that this has been increasing year over year. HDR itself sometimes can be a little bit aggressive. This often appears as blooming around a subject, but it isn't a common occurrence in my experience, but you might experience things differently depending on lighting situations and where you tend to take your photos. Edge detection when using the portrait mode also needs a little more tuning. It was once the best of the best. In most cases, it's clean, it's accurate, and the fake bokeh effect is pretty tremendous. Increasingly though, I'm starting to see smearing and the odd blurring around a subject and object edges. In those instances, I think the natural depth effect using that 5x zoom can just achieve a more natural blur effect, and it's something I've been playing around with more with the Pixel 7 Pro as I used the Pixel 6 last year and didn't have that telephoto. The ultra-wide camera as well is one of the weakest that you'll find on this particular flagship, but the colour tuning I do think means no matter which lens you do use, images are still consistent and colour accurate and have been tuned with Google camera updates over the past 6 months. That is something I do find infuriating when using other OEM camera systems. I think it's quite jarring and can ruin otherwise good lenses. And of course I come back here time and time again to the Pixel because it has that style and aesthetic that I think is really hard for other devices to replicate, even if they do happen to have similar or arguably better hardware on tap. Exposure is almost always perfect with superb dynamic range, and the large sensor means that natural depth of field is always pleasing, at least to my eye. Real tone as well continues to be one of the most underrated camera tuning features. It's amazing to have a pocketable camera that is always accurately exposing various skin tones, and it's only improving in more lighting and shooting conditions. Of course, I'll go back to that. One reason I always carry a Pixel for photos is simply that no other phone can handle moving subjects as well as this device, as well as also having those benefits thrown in on top. And after 6 months of using the Pixel 7 Pro daily, I will say that it gets better and better even with age. I will also say that I've enjoyed the double use of that ultra wide and telephoto to enable macro shots. Not only I think is this a good use of the already available lenses on this device, but it also prevents the addition of redundant or barely used hardware that most people will never utilize. I would imagine that 6 months down the line, you're probably not going to be using that macro shooter for many things. And of course, macro focus itself is just more than acceptable. It's slowly been improved, but even if I only really use it to try out, I do think it's useful to have it utilizing two lenses rather than having its own separate sensor. While I'm positive about macro focus in its addition, I do think it probably wouldn't be the better usage of the resources of Google's camera system and team to try and implement a dedicated Pro mode for the Pixel 7 Pro camera. I'm really confused as to why the option is still sorely lacking on Pixel phones, and I think it continues to be a glaring omission, especially in the 6 months since it's released, as I'm having lots of fun with the Galaxy S23 Ultra's expert raw full manual controls. It won't be for everyone, but it would be nice if Google made their own equivalent of that expert raw app, which is exclusive to Samsung Galaxy phones, but hopefully we'll see that in later down the line, and maybe Google will eventually get the message. Now the stills may be pretty excellent, but I do think the video modes are not what I would call plentiful, and that's somewhat disappointing that moving images are just still so far behind stills on Pixel phones wholesale. There are improvements. Contrast and colour reproduction definitely take a major step up once again here, but I'm itching to see Google properly apply some of the computational processing excellence to video modes. And although the OIS and EIS are borderline exceptional, the overheating issues when shooting more than 10 minutes of 4K 60fps footage does ruin those forward steps. That's not all though, as sometimes you can get artifacts, and focus tracking isn't always perfect in all modes, and that includes stills photography, but that could easily be fixed with a Google camera update, provided that Google is aware of those problems. Cinematic mode is a brand new option, and it isn't anything new on a smartphone, but it is nice to see Google try and offer portrait mode for video, and while it doesn't quite work all of the time unless you're filming something static, I do think the 1080p cap makes it fun for a little bit of fun and nothing more than a brief folly. And it has improved with system updates here too, but it isn't a killer feature nonetheless. If you're wondering about lifespan after 6 months of daily usage, I wouldn't quite claim that the Pixel 7 Pro has the best battery life on Android. Heck, that would be a lie, even when we start to factor in that Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 cohort, but it is an impressive all-day device even after 6 months of daily use. It's drastically better than the Pixel 6 Pro, which I found was acceptable in most cases, but sometimes needed a quick blast on the Pixel stand or with a wired charger before the end of a busy day to be considered consistently reliable. The fact that the display is tuned to 1080p right out the box also probably helps improve that daily lifespan. Coincidentally, this has been added to the Pixel 6 Pro with the recent March feature drop, so hopefully with Pixel 6 Pro owners, you may get some benefits later down the line too. My charging process is a bit of a weird one, as I tend to top up quite sporadically. I only charge to 100% capacity when I know I'll be away from a wall outlet for a long period. I don't charge to 100% every day. Often I'll just throw the Pixel stand on for 30 to 40 minutes and get a little bit more juice to ensure that I'm not hitting battery saver mode at the end of each individual day itself. Even with this odd process, I don't necessarily worry about my battery running out on a regular weekday. On a regular basis, I'm also getting a couple of days out of the Pixel 7 Pro if I do start from 100%. My most used apps though include Twitter, WhatsApp, Gmail and Slack, and I don't think this is particularly taxing on the phone, but I tend to see the screen on time above that 8-hour mark on a regular basis. I'm not too sure how it would fare if you're doing gaming and maybe GPS usage all day, but I doubt that double-digit screen on time would be common for you. And because I charge during the day, it's still an annoyance to have a 23-watt charger. Overnight chargers, or if you put your phone on charge before you go to bed, probably won't care, and I do think the improved adaptive charging works even better here in Android 13, with your phone hovering around that 80% mark before hitting 100% just before your alarm goes off each day. I think that's cool, but a bump to 50-watt charging, for instance, would be neat, as waiting sometimes a couple of hours to fully charge the Pixel 7 Pro is starting to get a bit tiring. Maybe with the Pixel 8, we'll get a much needed bump. To sum up my 6-month usage with the Pixel 7 Pro, I think there are only a few minor downsides to this device. One of those might be the chipset. While the Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 would be a welcome reprieve to provide a little bit of extra power, I will say that the Tensor G2 processor does provide 99% of the experience you would expect from a flagship Pixel phone, and the tuning itself of the software helps keep things slick and smooth no matter the application or use case. I think even after removing the recency bias, Google has really struck a fine balance with the Pixel 7 Pro. Without messing around too much with the Pixel 6 Pro's groundwork and formula, the annoyances have been diminished and the package has more poise and prowess in a wider variety and more expansive variety of areas. Now for a bold claim. I genuinely think that the Pixel 7 Pro is the finest phone that Google has made today, although we haven't hit major highs with the Pixel series. That means the full package as well. Camera, display, battery, software stack. I previously probably would have given that honour to the Pixel A series, which leveraged those premium functions but dropped the asking price. In some ways, at $899 or less now with discounts and rebates, the Pixel 7 Pro shoehorns itself into direct competition with $1,000 plus devices at the Galaxy S23 Ultra and even the iPhone 14 Pro Max, somewhere where it probably doesn't have any right to be. I think realistically that's a surefire way to help catapult Google up the sales charts. The Samsung Apple monopoly is really hard to break, and it's a shame that it's taken 7 or so attempts for Google to even try and seize this opportunity when we look back at what the Pixel 7 Pro has done right and what it's done wrong. I think if the Pixel 8 Pro can continue to build upon the solid 7 Pro's foundations, at least in the long term, it'll be one of the best phones that you can buy when it does eventually hit store shelves. Until then though, the Pixel 7 Pro remains, 6 months on, one of the best on Android, and it's definitely more than worth a look. I want to ask you though, have you been using the Pixel 7 Pro? If so, what do you think after a prolonged period of usage? Let me know down in the comment sections below. It's also interesting to hear your thoughts, use cases, if you liked it, if you didn't like it. But until next time, this is Damien with 9to5 Google. Thanks for watching, and I will speak to you later.